Welcome everyone to the HEA Professional Development Webinar series on vertical gardenings. And we're really fortunate to have a good friend and one of the leading educators, Shane Jones from Durham College, with us today. And just a couple of things as we go through. Firstly, make sure that your video is off and your microphones are muted. Any questions we will take in the chat. I guess I should introduce myself. Michael Pascoe. A lot of you know me. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Horticultural Educators Association. And I would like to think that this is my idea, but this is Shane and Lissa and Sally's idea to put these things together. And I think it's a brilliant way to share some new technology. And I think the timing is perfect because there's a lot of interest in this topic right now. And so Shane, I am going to turn it over to you, buddy.
Okay. Thank you very much, Michael. Much appreciated. Welcome to Durham College's Freight Farm, the Leafy Green Machine. Wanted to bring in here to kind of show you what it is that we have going on and how we're using it for the students and to integrate into the education and sort of our farm model as well. This was a new acquisition actually last December, just before everything started to fall apart, but it's given us some time to kind of take a look at it and kind of dial in exactly what it is that we can do with it, although I feel that there's more, and hopefully I'm able to show you some of that today. This was brought in as some extra money was made available to us. There's some other people, some in industry that felt that we were doing a good thing here at Durham College and wanted to give us some extra resources, and this is one of the things we just to give you a little bit of background, it is called Food and Farming, or Horticulture, Food and Farming. We have a restaurant on site that is a open to public restaurant throughout the year, and so it's not just a culinary program. And that means that they have an ongoing need for new food all the time. And we produce as much as we can in our greenhouses and our fields during the summer that allowed us to give them more on a consistent basis. I'm going to give you a walk around here in a second. We have been able to utilize this space throughout COVID, but it's been a little bit interesting, a bit of a tight space. So that means that no more than maybe 1 or 2 people have been allowed in here. But even still, even for the programming, it's been our ability to kind of recycle and just kind of keep cycling students through this space. And so they've all had a chance throughout the greenhouse production and environmental controls courses. So it's been a great opportunity for them to see how to use an enclosed environment and how to look at the programming management, different ins and outs of growing in this space as opposed to an open greenhouse. So I want to give you a little bit of a tour around and kind of give you an idea as to what it is that we can do here. It's a little bit different from some of the other hydroponic growing spaces. So this isn't a bunk bed, but it's more of a vertical grow, which utilizes a series of towers that are sandwiched, in and around the lighting system of the space. I've turned off the lights just for the purposes of this presentation, but maybe we can do so a little bit later on, pull them back up so you can get an idea as to what it looks like. They actually just came on. So it works on a day-night cycle that has its night during the day and its day during the night for a couple of different reasons. One, so it's easier for the people working in here, that they don't have to be exposed to the high intensity lights, but also just for an efficiency case in that it turns its lights on as its primary heat source through the coldest part of the day. And it does a really good job of actually, even though they're just a bunch of LED strips, and I mean a bunch of LED strips, they keep this place warm to the point where we have to cool it off even in the winter. So there's a a CoolBot air conditioning system that keeps this place from getting too hot. And if it ever does get too cold during the winter, the lights default according to the program set points to turn back on to introduce heat again. We were kind of curious about this one when we first got it in December. So mid-January, we waited till the coldest time that we could, turned off the CoolBot programming, and just simply turned the lights on to see what would happen. And we had the space up to 45 degrees Celsius on a day that was minus 20 with a wind chill. So it works rather well. It is a recycled fish shipping container. So that kind of fits our mandate as well, as far as trying to recycle as much as possible. So hold on one second here while I decline a call that was trying to interrupt our meeting. Okay, moving on. Okay, covered those. I think I'm good to give you the tour now. As you can imagine, within an enclosed space of a recycled shipping container, I don't know why I said fishing, there are some constraints as far as spacing is concerned. It was dropped in turnkey onto this space with all of the infrastructure that I'm going to show you already set to go, although we did change a little bit of the system set points just to meet our requirements. So I'm going to flip the camera around here and give you a bit of a tour. So I'm going to start from the front door with, of course, all of our safety signage already up for the students. As I pan around, you're seeing the control system for this space that gives us our readings, whether it be air, humidity, CO2, as well as we can look at different zones, switching across to the pH EC of our different tanks and water temperature through 2 different water tanks. And then, of course, all of the different settings as far as how to control and set our different environmental controls. There is a webcam that's installed as well, which we have not been able to get up onto the DC servers, but that is imminent. That's going to allow us to broadcast what we're doing in here to the greater class, which we're looking forward to. That way we don't have to try to bring in a whole bunch of students all at once. The air conditioning units, different controls, filters, and then of course all of our tanks for our pH up, down, nutrient A, B, and the recycling dosing that allows us to measure those outputs as they're going through the systems from the different tanks. It's basically broken up into 2 different areas. One that is the seedling space, where all the seedlings are grown to a certain stage, as well as the water tank that feeds those 2 and floods those areas. And then the larger growing space, which is broken up into 2 series or 4 columns, I guess, sandwiched around 2 light fixtures that run the length of the shipping container. And then, of course, dehumidifier system to help keep our VPD exactly where we want it. And the excess from the air conditioner, or sorry, dehumidifier then takes the water that is built up and then actually puts it back into the trough for the irrigation system that is going to send it back down to the main tank. Everything is just a vertical drip off of these top lines that run both sides, down back to the trough, as it were, and then back to the main tanks that are at the far end. So just to walk you back here, there are 256 columns in this space. As you can see, our dosing, and then main tanks with aeration, with sensors measuring EC, and of course, CO2 injection, which we can do in this space because it's enclosed. I'm not sure if you had noticed when we're looking at controls, we have this place. There were a couple students working in here earlier, but our CO2 is above 1,400 parts per million, which is going to allow us to produce a lot of food very quickly. In fact, we are producing, let me just turn you around in a second so you're not talking to the floor. We're producing about 700 heads of lettuce per week out of this space into the bistro, which is our restaurant here, Bistro 66. Or sorry, they're going to kill me for that one now that I flubbed it. Bistro 67. and also into the culinary programs. And actually, for a time when we first gone into shutdown, we weren't sure what our resources were, where our outputs were, because they shut down the restaurant and the culinary programs. We were donating to the local food banks just to kind of keep the production running. And we've created that articulation moving forward now that we're producing so much food, and that we're just sending it back to the community wherever the overflow exists. Although it also does feed our CSAs, and it's been working really well from that standpoint. It's meant to grow mostly leafy greens. So the idea being is that we would grow either lettuce or spinach of some sort, or kale, arugula, things like that. So you can see along the length of the tower here, and I'll explain the tower in a second. But it is my feeling, and sorry, is my idea that we should start growing other crops as well, just to give it a shot. And here is brand new, first off the line, one of the radishes that we are growing within this space as well. So we're also going to try some baby beets and some other just small root crop vegetables. It just depends on the amount of time that it's going to take for them to be in tower, and it's sort of just to keep our rotation going, which is why radish, which has like a turnaround time of about 30 days, it works well in our schedule that we're able to produce these and kind of move them through. The plugs that we use, let me just kind of explain the system here. So these plastic towers that build up the vertical farm house just two pieces of foam that end up sandwiching around this white, you can see, wicking strip that runs down the middle of the space and just kind of comes out the top a little bit. These require probably the most maintenance in this entire operation, in that they regularly need to be cleaned. But other than that, it's mostly just the time involved in seeding and harvesting and kind of exchanging the towers one way or the other. So water dripping down those will then be taken up by these plugs. These plugs are sort of a spongy composite between sphagnum moss and plasticizer, so it keeps them from degrading completely. They don't fall apart or enter the water system, so that we don't have that cleanup at the far end, although we still have to worry about any sort of water that's been exposed to the light sources that's going to create an algae and so forth. The little tables that they have here just sort of have a locking channel that allow us to kind of set these in place and then work on them in a static position so they don't fall off. There are not a lot of moving components so much as just getting the set points correct for the different crops that we want to create. We did have some problems when we tried to work with the kales and the arugulas, in that we weren't able to create a good synergy between the lettuce crops and them. We were always one way or the other. And certainly we've had to put in a bunch of standard operating procedures as it applies to IPM and just safeguarding against any sort of infestation into this space, because the aphids, when we did get them in here once before we did a turnaround and a clean out, we could see that it could have gotten really bad. And because we're trying very hard to stay as pesticide free as possible and use as many beneficials as possible at the college, just to kind of meet our idea of how we want to grow, it just becomes very difficult for us to control them once they're in. So we've just taken the approach of making sure they don't get in here to begin with. What else can I say? I mean, as you all know, in growing, you're taking most of your time and just doing the cleaning and what they want to do. Now that we have the CO2 controlled in this space, something that we can't do within the greenhouse, we're able to grow and produce crops in a much quicker volume than we normally can in any other space. Is there anything else I can add to that? Oh, internal temperature. Actually, that came up as a notification. We keep it around 20 degrees. Try to keep the relative humidity somewhere around 65%, just to kind of meet what we wanted to do. The temperature for lettuce is always going to be a little bit lower anyway. If we can keep it around 19 to 20, we're pretty happy about that.
Okay. Lisa, I don't see any, have I missed any questions in the sidebar there on the chat, Lisa? Is there any that I've overlooked?
One just came in from Tim.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, from Alex. Are you able to see it? I can read it as well. But...
I don't see it anymore. I did see it pop up briefly, but I didn't get a chance to read it.
Oh yeah, can you comment on the substrate, sphagnum moss and a plasticizer, Shane?
Yeah, so I can't. Hold on 1 second here because I'm trying to remember the name of the company we get them from. And of course, even though I can remember it every other time, it's not coming to me now. ZipGrow. So ZipGrow out of Cornwall is the one that we were able to get as far as north of the border for this particular one. And I'm just going to turn the camera around one more time so you can see it. So this particular plug, you can kind of see has a like a bit of a spongy quality to it. It doesn't break up or fall apart. So it's their own production that they make these, and that's probably the most expensive part of this entire operation is just getting in these plugs, because the number that we run through, you can imagine 700 heads of lettuce a week, but the cost is easily recovered for sure. I don't know. It is so take a look at ZipGrow's website if you'd like to take a look at where we get them from, and it might give you a better idea. But they're really good as far as not falling apart and entering our water system or causing any major cleanup for us.
Okay.
So
Shane,
hopefully I answered that.
yep. Thank you, Shane. I've got another question here. How much was the container? And I'm assuming as it is set up there right now.
Set up turnkey was somewhere in the neighborhood of just north of 100,000.
Okay. And where was the source for the container, Shane?
The name of the company that we worked with was one out of Boston called Freight Farm.
Yep.
So that'll be the company that you're looking for. There are a few of them around, though, a few different companies that have different systems. There's one out of Ottawa called Growcer, GROWCER as well. But they do more of a bunk bed style as opposed to a vertical grow like this.
Okay. I've got another question here. What is the electrical usage of the container? Do you have any info on that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's the thing that we have not yet been able to isolate. We're looking to put on a some sort of, well, not some sort of, but an electrical meter as it enters the freight farm, because that's the one commodity that we're not able to really quantify, or the one cost that we're not able to quantify as it comes in, so that we can really dial down as far as how much profit can be made. So keep tuned on that one. And as soon as we're able to get that going, I'd like to broadcast that out so we can prove this as a viable model.
Okay, thank you. And question here from Jack. Good to see you, Jack, or hear from you. Can you explain your CO2 generation?
Okay, so the CO2 is has a separate tank in the bottom here. Let me just turn this around. I'll explain the system and then the parameters in which we have it set up. Turn camera, there we go. Okay, so CO2 canister there with a regulator on it. Then to our electrical, but you can see the CO2 cable that comes up and then just feeds into the HEA system as it blows through. And our sensor array up here, which then measures it. And what the CO2 is going to do is directly okay, so it's going to directly affect the photosynthesis of the plants, right? The more CO2, the more size that they're able to generate based on the other limiting parameters like light, heat, nutrients, so forth, right? But CO2 is often lacking in a lot of our green because when we vent, we lose all but atmospheric parts per million, which is somewhere around 400 or so. But we know that plants plateau somewhere, depending on the plant, above 1,000. So we keep ours jacked up to about 1,200 parts per million, which allows them basically to go 3 times as fast as they normally would in a regular atmosphere. Actually, it's not even 3 times as fast because the relationship is exponential to the plateau at least. Anyway, so all this does is we just set the set points so that during a regular day, during a growing time, as the set point drops to 100 parts per million below our set point, CO2 injector turns on and brings it up to the set point again, and it'll continue that sort of back and forth. So let me just show you the history. As we go back, you can kind of see, well, where the students have been here, it's very high. And then it has this sort of flatlining, there we go, up and down through the rest of the night cycle, if you can see that. And then, of course, because it's a closed unit, the only time that we get any sort of atmospheric exchange is when it has to cool down with the outdoors. So we're able to keep that or maintain that above 1,200 parts per million quite easily.
Thank you, Shane.
Yep.
I think this could be the last question by looking at it. Would it operate on solar power?
Once we're able to see, solar power is so finicky, right? And the communities that need solar power are often the ones that don't have sun energy at the time of year when we need the most energy from them. So it's really difficult to say whether we'll ever be able to until we get to capture and store effectively the energy that's created through solar, although we are getting closer. I think that it's possible, even though it's not there yet. I think it's possible.
Okay. And this is my question. I haven't typed it into the chat. What is the software that's running the system there? You had a little touch screen and such, Shane.
Well, this is their own, okay. I'll come back to here we go. So Agritech is the one that has the controller operator on that one. Oops, let's go back. So it's, Agritech is the software that we use.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay, and there you have we have another question here. You have 1 strip of LED lights for each 2 towers. That's a question. So how many strips? You have 1 strip of light for 2 towers.
Yeah, basically. So there's 1 strip of lights that sits between every tower along the length. Okay. So it ends up being 128 strips.
Okay. Have I missed any questions, Lissa?
I don't believe you have.
Okay. So Shane, thank you very much for sharing this. This is fascinating, and I'm sure you'll get a lot of more questions too, and we can field them through Lissa so that we're not inundating you. But this sorry. So this brings us to the end of the.
No, I said no worries. Whenever the questions come in.
Okay. Okay. Brings us to the end of the webinar. What we're going to do with this webinar, and correct me if I'm wrong, Lisa, we're going to edit it and put it up on the HEA site so that everybody can access it. Is that correct?
That is correct. And it will be emailed out to all those who registered.
Okay. So thank you everybody for joining us. We're planning a few more of these. So if you've got topics that are that you want to find information on, send them to Lissa and we can field them and we can come up with probably a few more of these 15-minute seminars in the future. And on that note, thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you very much for coming out.